use on vocalists. And,
So it depends
you know,
on the voice?
yeah, you know, I use certain one on Diana Krall, and I'll use something else on Kurt, and you know, it'll vary. There's 4 or 5 mics that I have that are vocal mics. I have one little story with Diana. We've been using this same mic from the beginning when I started recording her, and it's just a great mic, and it sounded wonderful. But they were doing a film shoot right after, and so they wanted her out in the room with the big band and all, and to sing like a old stand-up girl singer. And they wanted a different mic, so we pulled out the 47 that Frank Sinatra used all the time at Capitol. The same one that he used, and Nat Cole and all that. And we put it into her. She opened her mouth one time, and she said, "What is this?" And we told her what it was. Now she won't do any recording without that mic. You know, I got to drag that around with me. So, you know, it depends on the artist and what they want to hear and the texture of the voice of what microphone you use. And sometimes you'll try 2 or 3 different mics. And on occasion, I've used one mic for ballads and another mic with same artist, same album, another mic for the more up-tempo out things. So it varies.
Another question? We have one over here.
He's got it already.
I guess I've got this.
Rely on him.
Al and Phil have spoken to this already briefly, but I was wondering if they could get into it in a little bit more specificity. This is, I guess, about the psychology of recording. And if you could speak to what you want from a musician when they come into a studio behaviorally, and maybe if you've got any really funny stories about what lengths you've gone to make artists feel comfortable in a studio setting.
That's a good, colorful question.
Yes. Well, I don't want them spitting on the floor, you know, and that's certainly one of the things we don't want, you know. Other than that, they're pretty much free to roam around and do what they want.
For comfort.
How do you harness them, you know?
We're talking about musicians now, right? Not zoo animals.
Yeah.
Because of the way you're talking about, I'm just checking here. So,
I think you have to realize that the unnaturalness of a studio. Sometimes they put some drapes in there, they look reasonable, and fake Tiffany lamps. They'll do anything. I will. You know, I like some colorful lights because I find we're in a new era, a really good new era, in the sense that everybody, thank God, is thinking about documenting what we do. And that used to be a no-no. And we've been lucky enough to get some people. The whole Tony Bennett album last year was all documented. 3 cameras, they were hidden at Capitol. They were done with remotes, so the lighting had to be thought of, which, again, if the musicians aren't comfortable and they're looking at, like I am right now, this light is right in my eye, you don't really want that. And there's a classic story with Sinatra. He had come to New York, and he hadn't made a record in years, and Quincy was producing L.A. Is My Lady, and it was the last dates of A&R, and he had agreed to this documentary. And when he got in the room, he said to me, "Get rid of the key light." Now, any of you know what that is? That means the most important light, which is on Frank. He said, "Get rid of it." And cameraman and the director said, "We can't do that." I said, "Well, you have a choice." If the old man wants to not have that light on, well, the film got basically not done. And so, you know, what was my choice? The choice was, why you got a second mic here? You never did that before. I said, because you're wearing suspenders and a belt, as far as I'm concerned. Because this date is too big a date with the big band live for us to have to consider that whoops, Mr. Sinatra, I've got a crackle in my mics. And that's kind of the way you approach a musician. If he's saying, well, I can't hear, why you got me in the booth? What am I doing here? Al never does that. You know, if you don't have that attitude, and if you're known as a grouch in the studio and a mean person, there's no session. I'm sorry. we are the physician in that sense. And the faster we get the room together, the faster we make a playback. At least that's my feeling about it. I know engineers have gotten mad at me because I'm playing back so early. Well, I haven't had a chance to really balance it. I said, they haven't had a chance to hear what they're doing. And I think that goes back to the days when, and certainly you know this, Mr. Avakian, that playbacks were a waste of time in the big sense of how you got 3 or 4 songs. So once you did one, I used to work for a producer, man, he said, you're going to get 4 songs. Don't play back. Well, that scares the hell out of you. And musicians don't like that. It's just obvious. I think that the psychological advantage between friendship and then professionalism is a part of it. It's like, you know, I don't want to go to the doctor and he picks up some used stuff. He says, what is it you said you got? What kind of pain? We don't do that, or at least we shouldn't.
Yes, 2 questions. One, Al, you're known a lot on your recordings for the great sound of the bass, and you said you don't have secrets, so I'm wondering if you hear that difference between your recordings and other recordings, and to what you attribute the bass sound that you particularly get. And the other question, if you want to handle it, is about the sanctity of the booth, and have you had any experiences where you have someone in the booth that expresses an opinion about what you're doing when that opinion isn't welcome, and how you might handle that?
Well, as far as the bass sound, you know, I always use a great microphone and a great channel, a great preamp. And, I mean, technically, the mic could be either, I always use a Neumann mic, and it could be a 47, old tube 47, or it can be a new 149, M149. It goes into a preamp, a 1081 Neve preamp, and then I put it into a Summit limiter, and I just barely touch the limiting. I don't let it limit much. It's maybe a dB at the most, and I do that for the sound. Why mine is better than anything, I don't necessarily think my bass sounds are always better than anybody else's. I get a good bass sound because it's one of my favorite instruments. And, you know, I think it's the rock of a record. And so I strive hard to get a good sound. But what was the other question?
You have someone in a booth gives an opinion.
Well, it depends on who he is. I was doing, Tommy LaPuma and I were doing a day with George Benson, and his driver was standing behind us telling us that there was too much bass. So we kicked him out, and that was the end of that. But you know, you take suggestions for people who are there, who know what they're talking to and who are responsible for the record. But I won't put up with people telling me what to do who that have nothing to do with the record, you know. I just don't have any, you want to talk about grouchy? That's it.
You listen to what I tell you?
Phil's go.
My name is Mary Ann Topper from the Jazz Tree in New York, and I've had the great pleasure of working with both of these gentlemen up here, and they're really masters. But I think my question really is about where do we find ears like this as we continue in this process. Neil's been asking if indeed we are listening to music differently, then young engineers are obviously listening to music differently and having a different upbringing about what the sound is about. But I think the most important thing for any musician or singer and musician in the studio is a comfort zone that comes from knowing they have ears and that they will not be in any way changing that, and that they are able to hear immediately. So the question is, do you guys know how the legacy that you're giving to us here, how does that continue? I don't know about engineer schools any more than I know too much about management schools. So I think it's really crucial we're able to find ears like this again.
Well, I go to schools all the time, and I'm going to one Sunday. I'm leaving to go to one in St. Paul. But I try to impart everything I know to these students, and whatever questions they have. I always bring a stack of records and play things and explain how they were done and why it was done that way. And if they have questions, I answer them as truthfully as I can. I don't know what else we can do to, I think we all try to do. I know Phil does, and George Massenberg, and, all of us are trying to impart as much as we can to.
Do you guys work with
new
people in
generations.
an internship or a sort of an acolyte situation, the way, for instance, you both got so much from Tom Dowd? I mean, that wasn't a formal training. You were following him around, you were working for him, and picking up on his values
Yeah.
and everything. Are there younger guys who are doing that with you?
I do it all the time. I mean, I always have people down and hang out when I'm doing dates.
Young engineers.
Young engineers. You don't have too many. Some artists don't like anybody
Right.
there. But always one or two, always. And my assistants that I work with all the time are full of information that they pour into these students. So, yeah, you have to give it back. You have to give something back.
And Phil, I mean, you're not behind the board very much anymore, but
You
you're
don't
working.
allow me.
Right. But when you're working with engineers, do you make a point of trying to get some younger ones in there, or actually perhaps decide that you're going to work with a younger engineer on some high-profile project because you think he's got the goods and you want to kind of bring him along?